Education podcast by Enolla Consulting. Well, how exciting. Today we're going to have a conversation about shining a light on advocacy. And I'm very pleased to say we have a shining light to talk to us about it. So, Amy Butterworth, welcome to you. So lovely for you to join us. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. Not at all. I think we're going to be thanked by our audience when they've chatted to you, when you've heard our chatting. Let's tell our audience a little bit about you because they might not know who you are. So I'm going to read from my pre-prepared notes. So Amy is, let me see this, that's right, an equity, diversity and accessibility and inclusion consultant living with long COVID. So we're going to want to talk about that. I like the Instagram handle.
Yeah, long COVID rockstar.
Like it, dedicated to activism around chronic conditions at work. Actually, that's nice because we want to talk some more about that as well. But you've also got an MA in psychodynamic and systematic behavior around inclusion work. That's very interesting. Really keen to talk to you about that. And from Cambridge University Business School, no less.
The psychodynamic consulting masters is from the Tavistock and Portman institution. So that is about the short version is kind of Freud at work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's understanding the emotional life that you turn up to each day.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had a difficult relationship with your mother and then your manager is a woman and she asks you to do something and for some reason you get really annoyed about it, a psychodynamic consultant will be able to just acknowledge that kind of dynamic and try to sort of dissolve the tension slightly in order to understand what the impact is on your work. The Cambridge Judge Business School qualification was the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Strategy for Business Impact.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about the fact that you have to convince businesses that maybe it's a good idea to be diverse. But so it's not just because it's the right thing to do or human rights, but also because you literally make more money with diverse teams, with diverse management teams. If you've got gender equality at the top, you make more money. If you have more diverse teams, they make decisions better. So the data doesn't lie. And so being able to combine this kind of quite sensitive, curious, people-first approach backed up by the data consideration can help businesses who might be a little cautious about what it means to improve their diversity and break down what those barriers might be very slowly and just understand what it is that might be getting in their way to make the changes that are necessary and then make those changes bit by bit.
Well, I like that because that takes us into all sorts of different directions. But I think what's interesting about that is that certainly there's no doubt you have to make the business case. Unfortunately, that's true. You have to. But the interesting part about what you've just described is you kind of then get the nice idea of the intellectual and the emotional connection, right? Which is, I think you've got to kind of do that with inclusion. But we'll come back to that in a minute. I don't want to rush ahead of myself because I want to get back to a starting point, which is that whenever we have our guests come into our studios, we kind of do what we do with our clients when we're first workshopping with them. And the first question we'll always ask in a workshopping session with a new client is, what brings you to the story? So tell us, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit about your inclusion story. What brings you here?
I, the story is it goes through various different genres.
Go for it.
I grew up in North London. I went to a state school, came from quite a privileged background, had academic parents and a very loving home. And I was one of those busy kids who did drama and violin and all this stuff. I went up, studied drama, did comedy for 10 years, and spent my daytime in admin and then my evenings doing comedy because I was convinced that if I really hated the job during the day, the comedy would be better at night.
That's funny.
And what struck me was the really boring and old-fashioned sexism and racism that still prevailed in comedy. And I was in a sketch group with two other women of mixed heritage and a white gay guy and me, who's white passing but mixed heritage. And we did a sketch group, many different shows, and one night I asked him, I said, would you ever put on an all-female comedy night? And he went, I wouldn't take the risk.
Wow.
This was in 2007, not 1957. And
2007, yeah.
so me and one of the girls from the group started up our own all-female comedy night, which sold out for a year. It was the first one in Piccadilly Circus. We called it Laughing at Something Serious. And and we didn't say all-female comedy night. We just said who was playing. And it turned out they all happened to all be women. But it was a really important lesson for me if you wanted to make changes, they have to be embedded and
Mm.
non-negotiable. We're not ticking boxes. And it was really important to me to platform new voices in a way that didn't compromise. So I felt that I couldn't make those changes from the stage anymore, and I didn't have the ego to survive in the industry. So I left comedy about 10 years ago and went into youth work to be a teaching assistant at a pupil referral unit in Wembley.
Mhm.
And when you're teaching teenage gang members maths, nothing prepares you for that than 10 years being heckled in comedy clubs because whatever they throw at you, including chairs,
Yeah, yeah.
if you can make them laugh, they're yours. And a friend of mine said, but you've got nothing in common with these people. Like, that you're not going to be able to connect. It's like, as long as you give a damn, that's what matters. And after working the Pru, I was like, I need to figure out how no one ends up in these places. So I started working in schools. I ran a sixth form for a while, moved into charity because I realized I couldn't change education from the inside. Schools, particularly academies, are driven by data that are to impress businesses rather than to serve the young people. Schools are now businesses that they're systems that don't serve their client, and their client is 12. So I tried to figure out how to fill in the gaps in other ways. So joining youth coaching charities and making sure we were reaching at-risk young people. And then I ended up at the Scouts, which was an amazing experience, designing inclusive youth programs for even more kids around the country. And what the UK do with the Scouts program often leads the way for the rest of the
Yeah.
global 58 million Scouts that are out there, which is just
Who knew, right?
extraordinary. And the last thing I did there in 2021 was to design the Money Skills Badge. So it was the first time we designed a money management badge for 6 to 10-year-olds. And the key thing for me was to be able to design it with and for leaders and young people with dyscalculia. And dyscalculia is a little like number dyslexia, because they're going to be at most risk of financial fraud when they grow up. They'll avoid things to do with numbers, which means that they're much more likely to lose money. And my argument was, if we don't bring them with us, we've failed. Also, those who have a neurodivergent way of learning have much more interesting workarounds in terms of how they try to figure out what it is that the problem they're trying to solve is. So I was asking one of the leaders, how would you figure out how long something is? And she was a DT teacher. She says, I can't use rulers because I don't know which is bigger, 17 or 12. So she has a laser pointer. And I was like, that's really cool. So figuring out how to make things more interesting, because on a scout camp, you don't want to have calculators and pens and pencils to figure out a budget. You want to figure out how many marshmallows you can stick in your mouth. So that was the kind of way that we would approach these problems. And it meant that by designing inclusively, not only did we design universally, you're making a much more fun badge, and more kids did it. And more leaders had access to it because they were like, this makes sense. And I don't have to be scared about my maths because this isn't about numbers. This is about empowering young people to make decisions more confidently rather than being good at maths. And that was the main reason. And we made sure that we had different, in terms of my inclusion journey, understanding the importance of having the minority voices in the room from the beginning. Otherwise, if we leave them behind, then we're just going to have to go back and redesign again. So we had Sikhs designing with us, we had Methodists, Buddhists. When we designed the actual picture on the badge, the first idea was a piggy bank with money and bank cards going inside. And the Muslim Scout Fellowship leader said, this is really cute, but our kids will not wear a pig on their arm. So like, good point, back to the drawing board. And so we redesigned it, and instead of a pig, we had a world, which made much more sense in terms of the nature
Yeah, it's,
of how economy works and our responsibility and our duty in there. But it shows how vital it is to have those voices from the beginning of design. So when we launched that, it got a lot of media attention, which was really exciting. It was the most successful badge in terms of completion for some years, and it got the financial inclusion, the quality mark for financial education, which was great.
that is great.
And it means that more kids can and leaders can take the badge, make it their own, which is all I ever wanted, is just to have a framework, like make it better than we do, but here's the approach that we need you to take.
Hmm.
And when I got long COVID, I had to stop work, which I can talk about a bit
Yeah, well,
later.
we'll definitely want to talk
But it
about that.
means that the absolute prime argument that I bring at the beginning of any conversation when I'm talking to a new organization or client is we need the minority voices in the room from the beginning. Because not only will we be serving them better, they're going to have the better ideas.
Absolutely. There's a legendary story about something that happened at YouTube years ago, and they were trying to figure out why it was that 10% of their users weren't uploading the content properly, and they were just completely and utterly flummoxed because it's like so easy to do. How are you not understanding how to do this? And they ended up working with a consultant because it just was such a vexing problem, literally a 10% fail rate. And the consultant was working for them for a little while, and then asked a really insightful question. And the question was, how many of the designers are left-handed? And the answer was none. And so they just looked at the world in a right-handed way. And I'm a left-handed person. I can tell you, I don't look at the world the way that right-handed people do. And it's just such a simple point about difference, right? And so your idea of the piggy bank is just such a brilliant idea because actually isn't the well a better metaphor anyway? So it's fascinating.
It means that you have to slow down your thinking a bit.
That's right.
And the first idea is just the first idea.
That's it.
And usually people will go to the right-handed position, the male position, the white position, the straight position, the
Yeah.
privileged position. And as soon as you start going, well, what about if someone who wasn't one of these things
What would they do?
used it?
And do you know what's actually quite distressing about that actually is that you may or may not know, there's a left-handed shop in Covent Garden. And as a left-handed person, because I've been conditioned by right-handedness, I don't understand how to use the things.
Oh,
And I'm left-handed, but I can't actually make sense of it because I'm so wired in to being living in a right-handed world. And that feels to me like, in a way, quite an important metaphor for us that we're so wedged into the system. And I liked you talking about embeddedness because I want to come back to that in a second, but I can see you I can see you reaching out to help me.
there is so much in terms of how much we repress about our natural selves in order
Extraordinary.
to fit into a world that has told us that your natural self is wrong.
That's it.
Even, I mean, that can be done for gender, for race, for
Doesn't matter.
disabilities. Like, there's two models when it comes to disability. So there's the social model and the medical model.
Hmm.
The medical model is you have a problem and now you have to build a ramp. And the social model is you are disabled because there isn't a ramp.
And that's worth just taking a second for, right? That is worth. So that's exactly right. And that is a whole, what a different spirit that is to the notion of accessibility, right? Is that it's not that you're not accessible to us, it's that we're not accessible to you.
I've been disabled by society.
It's such an interesting idea. That's so powerful. I I just want to pull a thread a bit if I can, because I'm loving where this conversation is going and can go. But I want to just hit something because I'm curious. Why does this matter to you?
There's two reasons.
Come
One, uh, can I swear?
quite
Yeah.
absolutely.
Because it's really fucking obvious that this is how the world needs to work,
Yes,
right?
really.
Systemically,
Yeah.
just do it correctly. If you consider everybody's use of how we get through a door,
Sure.
you're going to make a better door, right? If you maybe have an option for a left-handed person to open it, make it wide enough for a wheelchair, make it flat so anybody can move, make it a brighter color so if somebody has depression that day, maybe it shifts something a little bit. Just, it's really fucking obvious that this is how things need to work. And the other reason is very much what's called in the psychodynamic kind of world is guilt and reparation. I've been so lucky in my life with the support, the love, and the opportunities that I get access to, that you recognize just how easy it is for somebody else not to have that same access. And I really want to make sure that any doors that I open, I keep open for other people, and make sure that they then get to open a whole other room. So it feels like a duty of mine. And my energy is really limited as a result of long COVID. I have endless energy for this. And
Very interesting.
that's the thing that will keep me going. I got to the studio today, right? There's stairs included and a whole train. There was not, even if my energy was super low and very difficult, there was no way I was going to miss this, because the importance of it, particularly now as somebody with lived experience. I was always an advocate, I was always an ally, I was always trying to be the voice of somebody who wasn't in the room. Not voiceless, just not heard. And now I can kind of go, right, I'm also got all of these other invisible othernesses, but let me be an ally, and as well as being a spoken, like, lived experience person.
Can I just pick up on the word guilt?
Mm.
The writer brain's always going to pick up on certain keywords.
Yeah.
Is that still with you, do you think?
There is something about recognizing what you have that you have not earned. That's privilege.
Yeah.
Right? There's many different flavors of privilege. It's white, it's education, it's like pretty privilege even that people get, and able-bodied privilege, and all of these things. And you just understand that what you have access to, that you have not earned the access to, other people are going to have to work so much harder just to get there. And guilt is not a great motivator, because you can't really ever heal it, but it can give you energy, and you can turn, I tried to turn guilt into justice.
Okay, because I was like, can we find a word that transmutes and turns that into something that is a bit more, still lights the fire, but in a different way?
Yeah, guilt is very much a well of just kind of weird, privileged self-pity, I think. But if you go, well, I'm gonna have to do something with all of this energy in a well, so let's use get the jetpacks on.
And also, you bring, from the privilege that you have a certain level of knowledge, of understanding certain codes that other groups wouldn't necessarily know, in terms of those cultural codes. And so you're really primed to be an advocate for people in that sense, because you can easily open those doors more easily. And with more, because you speak in the same language and all the rest of it. So I think in a way you're kind of, you're kind of taken a bit more seriously, maybe, or more considered. I don't know, but you know what I mean? It's sort of, it's so interesting when, I think about one of the teachers that I had in writing over at the Criterion Theatre. Greg Moss, he just created this writers program for free at the Criterion Theatre. And he understands the level of privilege he has, but he's used that key to ensure that people from different communities can have access to a beautiful theatre. They come and learn. He teaches you. He'll talk you through it all. And that to me is just so huge. And he's such a big advocate of writers in general, and that patronage. And that's also, I think, part of what you're doing as well,
That was really key when I was working with a youth coaching charity. So it was called Think Forward, and there were coaches in schools. Apologies. There were coaches in schools that supported kids who were at risk of dropping out. And I created an enrichment program where we were putting them in touch with theatres, with galleries, in order to not only meet people who worked in the arts, but brought them into those arts spaces, because they would look at a theatre and go, well, I don't belong there. And making sure that we were getting them to the National Theatre, their local theatre of the Almeida, for example, and saying, you belong here. and telling them the tickets are over there, you go up to the box office and you pick them up because this is where you belong. So it was very, and even when we're talking about employment with them, it was like, I don't know what your life is like, but I do know that people like me are in hiring positions. So let me give you an insight about what my background is so you can understand maybe what I'm looking for and that kind of thing. So it was a kind of a cultural exchange of making sure that they understood what language to speak. And I think we could all bang on about how much the arts is important to every single class, but also young people in particular. I took a bunch of kids to see Hamlet with Andrew Scott as Hamlet, which is just an outstanding production anyway. And they were an amazing production because one of the guys who was in the show, who was a black guy from South London, came to speak to the young people, and we had a workshop, and he was like, look, I didn't think Shakespeare was for me either, but let me show you about my journey. So we went to see Shakespeare with a bunch of kids. One of them fell asleep halfway through. Obviously, it's a long show. When we came out, he was really quite quiet, which is unusual for him. And I asked him how he was doing, and he was like, he barely looked up. He was like, he's right, all your mirth leaves you. And it was the first time he had experienced somebody else voicing what depression felt like. He was 15.
Oh my God.
And he had seen in Shakespeare, having slept halfway through, what it meant. And
but maybe it allowed him to rest. So maybe
yeah.
So maybe that sleep was like, he's connected with it. I've been seen. I can just rest here now.
Psychological safety.
I don't have to.
That's what that is.
People get me. I'm safe.
Oh, that's a really nice way to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it goes to show how absolutely vital it is for young people to have access to the arts. And another soapbox I will not get off.
But I'm glad you weren't, because I think it's really important, because, again, I was thinking about this guilt piece that you raised, and I was toying with that word as well. We do a lot of work with incredibly privileged, blessed, I don't know what language you want to use, people. And I think to myself that there's something about this idea for me that says, actually, there is something about the notion of it's just the right thing to do. It's service. I think the problem with the guilt conversation is potentially that's about you.
It makes it about me. Yeah.
Right. And that's not it, right? If it's about you, then I think then we start getting into very complicated areas about saviourhood. And
we get into white savior stuff, and I just have no time for that.
But it's inevitable, right? Because you can't not do that. But there seems to me something just really rich about the idea of when a person is kind of resolved, they begin to come to a place where, they talk about their kind of hero's journey. Initially, life's about me, then life's about us, but ultimately then life is about you. And when you really are resolved, I think you can start saying to yourself, what can I do to wedge open the door of opportunity for other people? It's not a guilt thing. It's nothing in it for me. I don't need anything. It's just the right thing to do.
How can I serve?
How can I? And that's the point, right? And it's interesting because we're, still in the kind of, I wouldn't call it an afterglow. Maybe I'll call it the whatever of an election. We've just come through an election process, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about what you'd want to say to our new government. But the question for me would be about in that was saying there was so much conversation about we're here to serve. Yeah, I don't see a servant leadership model at play at all, right? The idea of the leader first being a servant seems to me something so absent. And I just do wonder to myself, when we show up in different environments, what's the good I can do here? How can I serve here? And I think that for me seems to be much more a compelling thing to think about.
There's a theory that the meaning of life is to discover your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away.
Beautiful.
The issue that we have with our leaders is that we have remained in a very colonial British Empire thing of the posh boys know what they're doing. Still very much class-based. I don't care if there is a brown man in charge or a woman in charge. If you're not from, if you are from a privileged background, you will simply think that you telling everyone else what to do is the right position to be in. David Cameron wanting to be the prime minister because he thought he might be quite good at it, not for any other reason. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about anybody else. And you see that, having worked in schools, you see that. You get Tory lords telling teachers what to do, having never set foot inside a school or knowing what it's like to be a teacher.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't
So
it?
the servant leadership has been very discredited because our whole system of government is founded in the rich are rich because they did things right, and the poor are poor because they
They
just
did
haven't
it.
tried hard enough and they haven't pulled their socks up. And if I'm rich, it means that I've done things right, so I can tell you what to do.
Mm.
And there it is.
But I
There it is.
think that people I think that servant leadership is huge. It's a massive paradigm shift, but you do hear it being used. But then you think, is that actually genuine? Do you actually mean that? Or
I
is
think
it just that it's something that people want to hear? I don't know.
I think people really struggle. There'll be certain types of people who really struggle calling themselves a servant at any level.
Yeah.
So I think it's the word itself, I think, is a problematic term
Yeah, for
in
sure.
terms of if you wanted to describe yourself, like,
Because the connotations of that.
yeah, if you're a wealthy
Yeah.
white guy, you don't really want to associate yourself with being a servant.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem, is the language is not inclusive for them
Mm.
to be able to own it with real power and go, I believe in the people below me, and I want to empower their ideas. So I want to support them to lead. So I think Nelson Mandela called himself a shepherd. Like, I'll be at the back of the sheep and make sure that I kind of am there at the side, and that's what's quite powerful. And that's the idea of inclusion and diversity, is making sure that those voices are being heard rather than them being told what to do.
Yeah, I completely, and I think it's about agency, autonomy, and so on. It's interesting. Chantal used the word earlier on. I thought it was an interesting word to use, because I think that there's something around me using my experience, my position, whatever else it might be, in the allyship space. But there's something. It seems to me it's quite an important build, because I think on the one hand, if I look at, and we work in very elite spaces, right? So we work in, whether it's the BBC or the major investment banks or whatever else it might be. And the thing that's interesting about those elite occupations is there's a kind of profound difference between getting into them and getting on in them, right? There's a big difference with that. And what we think is that there's such a well, because how they measure success and how they measure what you might call promotion, they measure that by potential, and potential is measured by a very ambiguous yardstick. So you would have heard, going around the organizations you've been, you would have heard little whispers that would say, yeah, Paul, not really leadership material. And you go, what does that actually mean, right?
I've got some stuff to say about
Yeah,
this.
I'm sure, right? But so the question about that is, to Chantal's point, I don't know the codes. So if I'm going to come in from an underrepresented community and I'm going to come into this space, I may be more intelligent than you, or at least as intelligent as you, but I'm probably not as educated as you. So I don't know the dark arts. I don't know how it works. I don't have the codes, right? So I need an ally. I need an advocate, but I might also need an accomplice. I might need somebody that can actually help break the system up for me. But sometimes I also need a patron. I might need someone that really would just sponsor me. And I think for people that are feeling that they've got to a point in life where they can be more philanthropic and want to give back, and they've broken free from the scarcity mentality, I want to just say to them, here's what we need, and we need lots of. We need some patrons, we need some sponsors, we need some advocates, and we need some allies. And actually, if you want to do good legacy work, this is where we need you. This is the space we need you to stand in. And it's important. And here's why it's important, right? The first time I ever flew to New York, I remember distinctly thinking to myself, settled into the flight, and they were saying, oh, the flying time to New York is whatever it was, 8 hours and 10 minutes or whatever, in those days, 7 hours, 40 minutes, whatever it was. I thought, okay, fine, you settle and you get ready. And then when I came back, I got onto the plane thinking, okay, I'm ready for this 8-hour flight home. And they said the flight time to London is 6 hours and 30 minutes. And I thought, have they found like a shortcut? How is that a thing? How is it possible that I'm coming back from America and it's taken me 6.5 hours, but it took me 8 hours to get there? I'm so confused until I understood that on my way out, I was dealing with headwinds, and on my way back, I was benefiting from tailwinds. And the reality is, in the workplace, people like me, it takes me 8.5 hours to get there because I have to deal with invisible headwinds that do not make it possible for me to move and glide through this organization with the speed and the ease that you do, because I don't come from the same school as you do. I don't have the same privileges you do, and so on and so on and so forth. And somebody needs to sort that out. Somebody needs to just be able to say, hold on a minute.
That's such a beautiful metaphor because the wind is invisible and no one talks about it.
No one talks about
No
it.
one's paying extra for wind. It just comes, right? Your ally, advocate, and accomplice thing does exist in systems.
Mhm.
So an ally would be a mentor, so somebody appointed. So there's so many ways you can do this properly for underrepresented communities, and you're absolutely right. They might be able to get in, but they might not be able to get on.
They can't.
And the reason is they can get in probably through a tick boxing exercise, but on the whole, minority groups are, say for example, in the tech industry, generally don't last more than 2 years because even though they are well, first of all, they're underrepresented at leadership, but they simply don't get promoted at the same rate as white people.
Oh, the data
Certainly
tells
not
you
white
that.
men, right?
Absolutely not.
The data at Google is astonishing. So an ally would be a mentor, an advocate would be a sponsor, somebody putting their own reputation on the line, saying, I am nurturing this person, they're going to be working with me. If anyone's got a problem with that, you speak to me.
Talk to me about it.
So it's a much more active thing, and you're literally bringing that person with you through the doors and into those rooms where they wouldn't normally get access. The accomplices are your employment resource groups. So making sure that you've got that community. So Google, for example, has the Black network, they've got the women's network, they've got the Asian network, the LGBTQ. So making sure that those people can feel safe and they can go to those groups because they experience the same thing at work. And the next thing in order to improve the headwind on the journeys of those people is to make sure that the system is designed to help them fly through at the same rate as the white guy, because it's about the same pace, and you can have exactly the same education, exactly the same outputs, but in performance reviews, minority groups are generally underestimated. If you've done well, it's usually a stroke of luck, and you're going to have to prove yourself again in order to get a promotion. When a white guy does it, it was like, this is just what you do, and you see their potential more, so they are hired on potential rather than experience. And it's the same with women. They'll often be they're like, well, we need to have seen that you've done this before we hire you, and a man will be trusted that they could do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's and just recognizing those tiny little nudges, and that's one of the things about being a consultant when you go in is so many people are very defensive. They don't want to be called racist, they don't want to be called sexist, and if you prove to them that they need to change something, by them admitting that they need to change something, it means they've admitted they've done things wrong, which is really difficult. So I go in very slowly. And I make the joke that, look, I walk with a stick, we're going to have to take this one step at a time, right? And I can't work all the time, so we're going to just do this very slowly. But it's about tiny nudges to let you know that you're doing things already. Let's just increase it. Yeah. So if you're able to do hybrid meetings, so you've got like Zoom meetings and stuff, when you're introducing yourself and you're adding your pronouns, maybe also add what you look like today for people who are sight impaired.
Nice.
And it just puts people on a bit of a level playing field. And then at the end of the introductions, you're like, oh, we're all white guys. And then that's just a little reveal.
Lovely.
Yeah, so good. So good. So I would ask you about long COVID because you've mentioned that. So I think let's just talk about some of the misconceptions around that. Because I think there are probably quite a few. And what did getting it teach you about yourself that you didn't already know, do you think?
That's a really lovely question. A lot of people, well, you don't hear about long COVID because we're all in bed, really tired. Yeah. There's 2 million people in the UK with long COVID, 65 million around the world.
Wow.
and a
Really?
lot of them are undiagnosed because they don't realize they've just like, well, I can't stop, can I? I have to keep going because capitalism or because kids or whatever. I believe there's 70% are women, which is another reason why there's not enough research funding.
Of course, yeah.
There's 6 times more funding into male pattern baldness than there is into chronic conditions.
No way.
Because women weren't included in medical research as standard until 1993.
That's not true.
And for ADHD research, 2017.
That can't be right.
We were just small, inconvenient men up until that point. Because our menstrual cycle was just disruptive, and it's just like, we can't keep doing, you know. That's why seatbelts don't fit us, because they're crash test dummies are men.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But it's even the but even like, you know,
That's a great
uniforms.
point.
I found this out.
That's a
So
very good point.
nurses' uniforms
Yeah.
are not built for women, so that's why there was a tie across the
police
chest and things like
officer
that.
bulletproof vests
Yeah.
are not designed for women.
Yeah.
And the amount of police officers who are fatally shot because they don't fit.
That's extraordinary.
This is another reason why I'm tired. Everything's so infuriating.
Well, life is quite exhausting at one
So,
level.
well, particularly when you get just the visuals on this kind of stuff. So the perception about long COVID, the thing with what is called a dynamic disability, where it changes each day, is that you don't believe the people. So when you look this good, people don't believe that you're sick,
That's the problem, isn't it?
right? I an ambulatory wheelchair user, so sometimes I use a wheelchair. Usually because I can't walk very far because it's so exhausting. So I will wake up with 5% of energy. I can't get more energy. I can change what I use the energy for. There's certain tools I can do to stretch it out a bit. So I can't generate endorphins by going to the gym. I can have a bit of coffee and I might be awake a little bit longer, but I will crash. And so much of the way that I move, like I walk very slowly now, I walk with a stick because I have to conserve my energy. Because if I reach a crash and I'm out, that's very difficult for the people around me. And it's really quite distressing, which is why I do so much meditation, so much journaling. So that I can just be at peace. I get places very early, if I get places at all. So it can be very confusing for people when it's like, but you look fine, but you seem fine. Oh, you could go there today. Well, maybe that means you're getting better. Recovery is not linear. And one of the biggest things with chronic illnesses, which is also very endemic with women anyway, is you end up gaslighting yourself because you're like, well, maybe I'm fine.
Wow.
You're not fine. You can just do this today. And so what it's taught me is about really slowing down, meeting myself where I am, and going, this is what I can do now, and not judging it.
But also going right back to the beginning of the guilt, not feeling guilty for that.
The guilt of not serving, the guilt of lying down, the guilt of seeming lazy, the guilt of being on benefit, and going, surely I don't deserve, maybe I'm not really, like it. And then you realize that, and then on days when you can't get up, you're like, oh yeah, no, this is why. Or when I have a meeting and it's a 45-minute Zoom meeting and I have to lie down for 4 hours afterwards, you're like, oh yeah, this is why I have to have employment support allowance, because I can't, if I think too much, my legs get tired. So, which doesn't make any sense at all. So it's why the anxiety has to be really managed, meeting yourself where you are and without judgment. So what it's taught me is that any judgment or anxiety is because I've been using other people's judgment levels. I've just been lazy today, according to patriarchy. You know, I'm a drain on the economy, according to capitalism. No, I don't subscribe to these systems. So I'm not of less value just because I can't buy stuff and because I'm an active member of the economy. And just recognizing that even though there are things I can't physically do anymore, it doesn't stop me being that person. I really struggle with the narrative of my old life and my old self. And it's like, I still am a boxer, you know? I still am a runner. I still am a manager. I still am a comedian, obviously. It's just I do it in a different way. The mindset is still there. The commitment to myself is still there. And making sure that I'm believing in what I have to offer now is just the ultimate gift I can give myself each day. It's a daily practice though, and
That's so
that takes
important.
time.
Can I ask you just if I can take you back to the corporate world for a minute? Because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, all these people that run Diagnose that you just described, and I'm thinking about the earlier point that you're an advocate around all kinds of chronic conditions. I guess my question is, if I was an employer, what should I be most concerned about? Should I be most concerned about absenteeism, or should I be more concerned about presenteeism?
Excellent question. So first of all, as an employer of somebody with long COVID, you should be concerned about what value they have to offer. What's your greatest passion and your greatest skill? Because that's what you need to maximize. They will be able to tell you after a certain time, and if you're gifted the time and space in order to learn how to manage your energy, they'll be able to tell you, I'm better in the mornings, don't put me in meetings in the afternoon. I can read stuff on a quiet day and then come back to work, and you'll have to trust me that if I can't turn up to a meeting, then I will make it up at another time, making sure that they can be flexible. If as an employer, presenteeism, where you think that people are only of value if they are on screen or in the office, you will need to readdress that value. That is not up to your staff to meet, because not even people with long COVID, some people with different neurodivergences, or even people who are introverted or have babies who are screaming at home, might be able to work better at home,
Yeah.
right? And absenteeism is a sign that people do not feel safe at work. If you are bringing someone back into work who has long COVID, there is something called a phased return. So, try it for a day, a week, and then slowly build up on that. My advice to them would be take it extremely slowly. Do not rush into getting back to a full day or even a full week. It's unlikely they'll be able to do that. And don't let that be the goal. The goal can only be meeting them where they are at. If you increase to 2 days a week and they are starting to go off sick again, don't let them use their annual leave, because that is not fair. What you need to do then is reduce the phased return again. So if 2 days is too much, let's go back to 1 day. And consider implementing disability leave for that person, which gives you extra days, which do not cut into your annual leave, for things like recovery, surgery, appointments, diagnoses, and that kind of thing. So it means that they aren't being penalized just for their chronic condition. But don't let them use annual leave if their sickness or their day off is related to their condition. That's when you employ disability leave. So that's a systemic idea, but there's also an emotional approach of don't try to get them back to whoever they were. They aren't who they were. So meet them where they're at and move as slowly as they need to.
I think that's so important, right? Because the distinction that leaves me with is, I mean, we're kind of slightly the other side of it now, but the furore that is this conversation that people talked about, RTO, and when they had the RTO
I don't know what
conversation,
RTO is, sorry.
return to office
Oh, right.
conversation, right? What was so interesting is the way that it was being presented was that return to office was the same as return to work. That the notion was, if I wasn't in the office, I obviously wasn't working. And that feels to me such a kind of Luddite way of thinking about stuff. And what I'm hearing about, you're telling me about people with chronic conditions, which I find really interesting, is it feels to me like being able to return those people to being able to feel they're adding value. And it's a return to value I'm going to take from that, and I think that's really really useful. I'm super interested to know. I know we've got to close the minute, but I'm super interested to know if you were dropped you off at number 10 Downing Street, and we've now got the government is now in place. Any advice?
I've got a list. I thought about this and I was like, right. So first of all, put immigrant mothers in charge.
Yeah,
No one knows the system better.
that's true.
No one has been able to make the most out of the least. And build a community, understand what young people need and what working people need. So absolutely number one. I really liked I think they're the only people who put this in their manifesto, but the Liberal Democrats wanted to add care leavers as a protected characteristic.
Yeah.
So on top of age,
sense.
race, gender,
Brilliant.
because that affects your chances just as much, if not more.
That's a great point.
So really, data-driven diversity goals, curricula designed for neurodivergent kids in mainstream schools, making sure that play is the basis for learning, because that is proven time and time again that's the best way to learn, not in rows, in tables and being quiet. We are not in the Victorian ages. They're not going into factories, but we kind of think that they are. Teachers need to be in charge of education. If you want to be an MP, you have to do a year of being a teaching assistant in an underserved school.
Wow.
Great.
I love that.
Everyone has to do this.
Yes.
How else are you going to understand your country that you are serving, which is the word that we brought up before? Could you imagine? Nigel Farage would not stand. Proportional representation of class in cabinet.
Yes.
Because if we only have the House of Lords, for heaven's sake, what do they know? We need the House of. We need the
Although
House
they've
of.
saved our necks a few times.
We need a House of Trade Union representatives. Like, we need those guys. We need a House of Mick Lynch's and Dawn Butlers, and to make sure that the billionaire, there is no billionaire status. As soon as you get to 999,999,999 quid, anything you earn over that goes into the arts, education, and the NHS.
Vote Amy.
Yes.
I
love that.
I would drop the mic, but it looks very expensive.
It's done.
So I think the last question I want to ask you really is, given everything you've said about COVID and chronic illness and mindsets around value, how could you be kinder to yourself, and what advice do you give others?
The kindness is a daily thing. I'm the only person I speak to most days, so it's really important that that I say some nice stuff. I'm quite forgiving. The kindness, in terms of being kinder to yourself, and I think this is something that many people who acquire a disability in adult life struggle with, is asking for help and assigning value to your own needs. I remind people that, and it's always people pleasers as well, who just love being out there and helping other people. No, don't worry about me, let me help you, which is a really toxic way to avoid your own vulnerabilities and not give other people the chance to help be a cheerleader for you. So I would remind people that, when somebody asks you for help and you're like, yeah, I can do that, and how good that makes you feel, you can give that gift to somebody else.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
That's really nice. That's really nice.
And joy is enough of a reason to do anything.
Well, it's a political act, isn't it? Joy.
We really live in a world
It
of
is.
like, well, if it's not productive or if it's just fun, then it's not enough. It doesn't matter. It's not real. It's why we don't play anymore as adults, because it's not a serious thing, and serious is the only way to be. Come on, what do you think? My hair is pink. It's ridiculous. So making sure that joy is enough of a reason to do something.
Yeah.
Just like, what have you done today? Do you know what? I had a lot of fun.
Wow.
I just got some Play-Doh and I made a whole drag queen out of it.
That's brilliant.
Why? And that's enough. It was fun.
Because it could. I wonder if we could think about that, Chantal, as an out, and just think to myself, I wonder if that joy notion might get you to make that, you asked about the transmutation. Maybe it's the shift from guilt to gratitude. And when you're just living in that place of gratefulness, and there's a joy in the abundance of giving, isn't there? And
Gratitude has been the biggest thing that has shifted my mindset in terms of anxiety. If anxiety is rooted in the feeling of lack, gratitude reminds you that you are sitting within everything that you need.
Absolutely.
And that helps to mobilize you, because you realize you have all the resources that you need. And one of the things that I do with this abundance meditation every day is there's a different mantra. And so these things just become how I talk to myself. Everything I desire is within me. And that's what gratitude teaches you. And you're just lying on the sofa, doing nothing, feeling like you're pointless and worthless. And you're like, everything I desire is within me. I can't do anything different that day. I'm still lying on the sofa, but I don't think I'm pointless anymore.
Amazing. You're a long way from that.
Long way.
what an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much
Thank
Thank you
for
so
you.
joining
much.
us. Seriously.
It's such a privilege to be here.
The
I'm
privilege
really,
is
really
ours, I
grateful
promise you.
for your invitation and for your curiosity and your respect. I really thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Amy
Thank you.
Butterworth, everybody. What a joy. Thank you
Thanks very
so
much.
much.